So if you're someone who's, becoming fatigued with all of the Nintendo Switch Mini or Switch revision or Switch cheaper revision talk, speculation, rumors, well, I have some good news for you because it does seem that we're going to actually get information possibly this week in one way or another, because whether Nintendo wants to tell people about it or if they kind of come up with predictions that would match that analysts are thinking about right now, there is a chance that we could find out more information about a possible revision, either a cheaper model or technically a more expensive, or like a new model that they introduce that could replace the current one, a modest upgrade as Bloomberg has kind of talked about here. And a lot of that's going to have to do with them reporting the pretty much the end of this fiscal year, which ended at the end of March. And now we're going into their next fiscal year, and they'll have projections and everything and kind of talk a bit more about what they expect this year coming up. Now, they'll, of course, give us kind of predictions based around how many they expect to sell. And analysts are currently estimating about 17.5 million were sold this past fiscal year, which I think falls in line with where they put their estimates and everything. And they're expecting them to raise their projections for this fiscal year coming up to about 18.5 million, which, okay, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Now, if they release a revision, there's a chance it might even be higher than that. Nintendo could show up with a pretty good projection that would more or less mirror the idea of a Switch Mini or a cheaper model releasing. The only thing is, if they have a more powerful version or like a Switch Lite or something like that, a new Nintendo Switch, it would be harder to reflect, I think, in the projections, because it more or less would probably be about the same price as the current Switch. Whereas, obviously, a cheaper Switch would help sales in terms of units sold, and that would probably reflect in their projections. So, Bloomberg put out an article that a lot of people have been talking about, because it does bring up some questions around this, because they seem to be pointing with different sources that a Switch Mini, or just a cheaper Switch, I still don't even know what they're going to call it. It's hard to say, but they're expecting that to actually launch in June, at the end of June. And they are actually citing anonymous sources, 2 of them that wish to be anonymous. Now, these sources could be in Nintendo. They could be on the production line of these things, because if they are coming out in June, they're already being made. Like, they're already producing these things. It is interesting to me that so many publications seem to know about the Switch Mini, but not whatever the Switch modest revision is, as Bloomberg says here, or a Switch Pro or anything like that. It seems like everyone can figure out what a Switch Mini is, right? That there is a cheaper Switch coming. I know it makes a lot of sense, but the fact that everyone seems to be able to find out information about it is telling, I think, right? I mean, there are so many rumors coming out about this thing that it seems, I think, fairly obvious to a lot of people in the first place that there'd be a cheaper Switch. But the idea of it coming sooner is definitely interesting to a lot of people. So this is actually the passage in their newest article. You can read this down below. I'll put it in the description, where they say the growth in the current period will get a boost from the launch of a new, cheaper version of the Switch, according to 2 people familiar with the matter who request to be anonymous to discuss private plans. The new device will likely be launched by the end of June, according to one of the people. The existing Switch will receive a modest upgrade this year through a more powerful version, though a more powerful version is not in the works, the people said. So the modest upgrade kind of falls in line with what Eurogamer said at one point, that it would be similar to a 3DS, to a new 3DS, where they might do some upgrades to possibly the screen, maybe battery life, maybe slightly more powerful, just because they might change to a different fabrication for the chip, and just by default it's either more efficient or it just is stronger just because the fabrication has advanced. Those are kind of the thoughts on that. It is interesting they pretty much shut down a more powerful version right away, although this is from, again, 2 people familiar with the matter who are requesting to be anonymous, so you never really know, I guess. I am interested that they think it would be coming out at the end of June, or by the end of June, because we're in April now. So that means it'd be out in 2 months. That's pretty soon if you really think about that. Now, Nintendo is known to announce new hardware a month or two before it comes out because they don't want to hurt the sales of their current system, the actual Switch. Even people waiting for a cheaper version could do that. And if you announce it like 7 or 8 months out, then you could have a problem with that. Remember, Microsoft announced the Scorpio like way in advance, and I think it really hurt their sales over the course of an entire year because some people were just like, I'll wait for this Xbox One X. It's going to be much more powerful. And Nintendo is a bit smarter when it comes to that, I would say. Or they of course rely heavily on console sales, whereas Microsoft just doesn't really care at this point about console sales, they're more about services. So I don't think it's very weird for Nintendo to possibly talk about it tomorrow or the day after when they report financials, and then it does come out in June. I don't think that's like crazy or off the wall or anything, because Nintendo's done. I mean, remember back with Eurogamer, it was a long time ago now, where they talked about the DS Lite, I believe, and there were so many rumors about it, and Nintendo said we're not, or a UK representative for Nintendo said, yeah, that's not happening. Then 2 days later, they announced that it was coming out. So Nintendo, they're weird when it comes to that. I think that's more or less communication coming out of Japan. And I honestly, at times, think some of these representatives find out about this stuff close to when we find out about it, which is weird to think about, but it wouldn't shock me. So a cheaper Switch in June is an interesting concept for a few reasons. One, I think it makes sense to get it out well before the holidays so that you are stocked for the holidays, whereas if it released in October, there's a chance it could be sold out through December, and then their stock issues would actually hurt them in the end. So I think it makes sense to do that. I actually think most consoles don't actually need to really launch around the holidays to sell out anymore. I think the PlayStation 5 and the next Xbox, they could launch like next March or April and they'd still sell out, and then they'd have plenty of stock for the holidays. I think the Switch did a great job launching in March because of that. So if they launched it in June, I think it would make sense for stock going into the holidays. Obviously, they'd have a full, 5 months or so to make sure they're ready to go for December. But the other thing that's interesting is they would at least be launching around a very large game. And that would be Mario Maker 2, which is going to be pretty big online, right? Twitch and everything will be huge for it. YouTube will be really big. People will be playing levels. We'll probably play levels here and have fun with it. But the interesting thing about that is launching next to a game like that would also help. But there is something that's been kicked around online, and I think it's a cool idea, is if the Switch Mini came with something like a stylus for Mario Maker 2, I think that'd be a cool little way to kind of differentiate a bit from the main Switch, the one that a lot of people use. And if it doesn't dock, that would also kind of play into the use of the stylus. And then, of course, Nintendo loves accessories, so they could sell a stylus separate for people who have like the OG Switch at this point. That's a cool idea to have that, and it is an interesting concept that would actually work well with Mario Maker 2. Now, my other thought was that it actually launches towards the end of the year, and of course, Pokemon comes out, and boom, here's a Switch next to Pokemon. But if they launch the Switch Mini in June, then they would have time to come up with special edition Switch Minis, or I'm just calling it Switch Minis at this point, but Switch Minis for Pokemon, which would be very big at that point. But we have the fiscal year earnings release. That's April 25th. So that's tomorrow. Because it is in Japan time, it'll probably be super late at night / early in the morning. Like it'll be, I think Eastern time, it releases at like 3 a.m. So I'll cover it tomorrow, and I'll be curious because generally they put out a PowerPoint slideshow thing. Remember last time they even told us about Mario Party sales and stuff just to tell us. We've had that before. So I wouldn't be surprised if they throw in information possibly around a revision of some kind, because the projections would reflect that. And people are going to go through the information they put out for money and R&D and all this stuff. They're going to look around and say, okay, what are you guys spending money on? And of course, Nintendo at times, remember that when the new 3DS or new 2DS XL got announced, it was out of nowhere. It was the weirdest thing because they just dropped it on Twitter and they said, hey, new 2DS XL, coming soon. we were all talking about the 3DS being dead, and then they drop a trailer about a brand new 3DS, I guess, entry. It was a 2DS XL, but an entry in the 3DS family at that point. It was a weird situation. So this isn't set in stone or anything with a Switch Mini, obviously, but everyone keeps, so many places seem to have no problem finding information on this. And I think the reason for that is that it is in production. Like, I think they're already like on like the factory line right now. And that would make it easier to find people who have had experience, or maybe even information from marketing and stuff about when it's going to launch. I think that's where a lot of these sources are from, to be honest, is probably their marketing departments, not necessarily people who are actually on like the factory line, now that I think about it. So finding a release date for it is a bit surprising, but if the marketing department already knows that it says June, well, there you go. But interesting stuff. The good thing about this is we don't have to wait too long to see if their fiscal year earnings can at least point us in the right direction when it comes to these revisions, as we'll have these pretty much ready to look over tomorrow. And it's going to be a very interesting week now that Bloomberg's posted that article, and people are going to be looking through the fiscal year earnings to see if they can spot any clues about any revisions. But exciting stuff nonetheless. And I'll keep you guys up to date on this. So make sure you're subscribed and everything, and make sure you like the video if you enjoyed kind of this, I guess, bit preview, something to look for the fiscal year, or dislike it if you don't like it. And I'll see you guys in the next video.